This is a brand new BMW iX. Today, we're going to find out if BMW has created their own modern EV marvel, or if this is just another car that happens to be electric. Oh, that's cool.
And yes, I have traveled all the way to Denmark to drive this BMW iX. Denmark is an extremely green country and there are bikes everywhere. Most people even commute on bikes. In fact, there are 1 million people in Copenhagen, but there are 2 million bicycles. This means there of course are bike lanes everywhere, but there are also bike roads, bike bridges, and the bikes even have their own little traffic signals.
On top of that, Denmark gets most of its energy from renewable sources, so there are windmills everywhere as well. So with that in mind, what better place to come and drive an electric car?
The iX is BMW's first fully born from scratch electric car. That is, if you don't count that quirky little i3 that they came out with a few years ago. But this is the big one, the one that BMW has gambled all of its money on. This is going to be their main electric vehicle.
BMW obviously has been building very good cars for more than 100 years at this point, but with this being their first electric vehicle, we're going to try to find out if they built a modern marvel of their own, or if this is simply just another car that happens to be electric. Now, the very first thing you see is obviously the looks of this car, and they are polarizing for sure. I'm usually not a fan of boxy and squarish kind of cars, but this car is beautiful. The lines are very futuristic, and even the ginormous grille that they've been putting on their cars lately seem to fit perfectly, even if it isn't actually a real grille. It's immediately obvious that this car belongs to a completely different category than all of BMW's regular cars, and that's a good thing.
The headlights on this car are thin, narrow slits, and they're matched beautifully with similar looking taillights. And those taillights are just some of the best looking ones around at this point.
One thing that's interesting about the taillights is if you open up the tailgate, there's actually a completely separate set of taillights on the body. The reason for this? By law, in most countries, you are not allowed to have your taillights on a movable surface. So BMW simply just created a second set of taillights. Now that second set of taillights is something Ferrari could have learned from when they built the Ferrari California, which, as you may know, has a set of really odd-looking brake lights down below on the body. They sort of don't fit. That was done for the very same reason. When they were done with the design of the car was ready to go more or less, they were informed that they couldn't have the taillights on the trunk lids, so they had to add an extra pair. I think BMW did it a little bit better.
And speaking of the trunk, it's a pretty good size. It's not ginormous, and a lot of people have been complaining about that, but I think for an SUV of this size, it's pretty decent.
What you don't get though is a frunk, which is odd because there seems to be a lot of room out there, but what you do get is a really cool way of adding sprinkler fluids. Because the front doesn't open at all, BMW came up with a little filler that's hidden behind the little BMW badge out in the front. I think that's super clever. So I'm a fan of the looks of this car, but I know that's not the case for everyone. I'm really curious to know how you feel about the looks. Let me know in the comments down below so we can see what everyone feels like. I do have a couple of little complaints about the exterior. Number one, the doors, well, they just don't feel like BMW doors. They're kind of clunky when you close them. They don't make that BMW thunk. There's a little odd piece of the door sticking out next to the window. I'm not a big fan of that design. Also not a big fan of the outside door handles. While the car will of course recognize you when you walk up to it and unlock itself and all that, when you try to open the door, you kind of have to twist your hand around and sort of pull up. And that's not always convenient, especially if you're carrying something at the same time. The other thing that I really don't care for is the charging port in the back. It kind of looks like an old school gas filler port, and when you open it up, there are 2 charging ports in there and they each have a separate cover on. So you actually have to open 2 covers. For the same thing, when you're done, you have to remember to close the inside cover before you can close the outside cover, and it just works a little clunky, not nearly as elegant as what Tesla has done on their cars. This feels like a little piece that BMW just carried over from their old gas engine cars.
Electric cars are extremely popular in Denmark, and almost half of all new cars sold are electric. Because of that, you can find a charger on pretty much every street corner. You even get to park for free in Copenhagen. You do, of course, have to pay for the charging, and that is surprisingly expensive. Charging the iX from 20% to 80% cost me around $60. That same charge would cost me around $17 in my garage back home in the US. And that's even with California's super high electricity prices. So charging is expensive here, but you still get to see a lot of really cool electric cars and even a lot of models that we don't get in the US.
This particular model that I'm driving is the BMW iX40. That's a model that we don't get in the US. It is the entry-level model over here in Europe. The main differences really are it's down on power a little bit and down on range, but then there's one other crucial difference, and we're going to get back to that a little bit later because that has proven to be very important. In terms of power, this car right here pumps out about 326 horsepower, which may not seem like a lot for a car that weighs north of 5,200 pounds and probably more like 6,000 pounds by the time you get it on the road. It also means that the car can go from 0 to 60 in 5.8 seconds, which may not sound like a lot. But as always with electric vehicles, it's really all about the torque. And the torque is 465 foot-pounds, which is great, and still will give you that EV push in the back whenever you step on it. I think for all intents and purposes, the power of this car is plenty. I haven't missed power at any point in this car, so no problem there. What isn't as great is the range. Now, this car's battery is 77 kilowatt hours, which isn't huge. It's good for an indicated range of about 264 miles, probably a little less in the real world. And that's about the same as my now 13-year-old Tesla Model S. And I would think this long into the evolution of EVs, you would have a car with a little further range, especially at this price level. And speaking of price, this car here in Europe will cost you around $78,000, which seems expensive when you consider that the next level up, the 5.0 in the US, starts just around $82,000. The footprint of this car is very comparable to that of the Tesla Model S. It's within an inch or so. The car does feel bigger though, especially on the inside, and it's bigger when you're driving it and very much bigger when you're trying to park it. Now, the interior of the car is a complete chapter of its own. It's cavernous in here and it's very futuristic looking and has lots of cool new materials. This particular trim is not great. I don't know who spec'd this, but I think it was Austin Powers. It looks like an airplane from the 70s. Not a fan. I have, however, seen photos of nicer spec cars with beautiful leather in different colors, and they look quite nice. And one thing that I just don't care for at all in this car is this little plastic speaker grill in the front dash. It just looks cheap. The interior does have some interesting new materials. In the center console here, there's a little wood veneer piece that's completely flat and the little buttons are hidden within it, which is kind of cool. They're a little bit difficult to find, but it is kind of cool. Also, the seat adjustment controllers and the iDrive unit and the little volume scroll wheel here are all crystal, which is very, very cool. It does have the unfortunate side effect at times that if the sun hits you just right, the iDrive button will be blinding, but I'm willing to live with that. Also willing to live with that the little volume control button is also a mute button, and a lot of times when you're trying to adjust the volume, you actually end up putting the radio on mute. One thing that's a little bit more of an issue, and it's not just in this car, is the mirror consoles up here. If you happen to be tall and your eyesight is up here, they take up pretty much half of your view out, and that's not great. But I think in a nicer trim, this cabin could be a very, very nice place to be. The seats are very comfortable too and kind of cool looking as well. One thing that's a little surprising is the rear seats. There is a lot of room in there, for sure, lots of headroom, but because of the body shape, you kind of get squeezed a little bit on the side, so you end up moving more towards the middle. So if there's a third passenger back there, that person is definitely going to get squeezed. What is cool though in the back is that the seats both have two USB-C charging ports built right into them. And the back also comes with complete climate control. But the star of the cabin is obviously this huge, sweeping dual display dash. I say dual display because while it looks like one continuous display, it actually is two separate displays, but they work really, really well. It's all controlled by BMW's new iDrive 8, and I've said it before, but iDrive is just one of the best in the business when it comes to controllers, and version 8 is even better than it used to be. The whole thing works very smooth, it swipes, pinches, and zooms without any kind of delay, and now the center dash here in front of you is actually great and contains a lot of useful information, which was not the case in last year's model of the 4 Series, where it was just kind of small and confusing. This whole thing looks like a true electric vehicle dash. The only minor issue, and this is normal these days too, is that the climate controls have been moved into the iDrive system. So while you have the temperature controls available at all times, if you need to make other changes, you have to go through the menus to get in there, and the menu is actually pretty long and can get difficult to get to for the second seat. One thing that's interesting in there though, which I had not seen before, is there's an option for radiant heat. If you press this little button here, various surfaces in the car will actually start emitting heat, which could be great on a cool winter day. Right now it's summer here in Denmark, so we will not be using that today. Also cool in this car is that there are 2 separate phone storage slots, one for the driver in the center console and one for the passenger over in the door, which is great. Your phone is standing up and available to you. What is not so great are the cup holders. They're positioned down here onto the center console, and they're kind of hidden by the center console, which makes it very difficult to get to your drinks. I don't understand why that was made that way. You could easily have made the center console just a little bit shorter and you would have access to the drinks, so not great. There's also an electrochromatic sunroof, or I'm actually going to call it a moonroof because it doesn't really open. But if you push a button up here, it turns from opaque to clear, or at least semi-clear. It's not really completely clear, but that is pretty cool. The iX also has buttons instead of handles to open the door from the inside, and I'm just not a big fan of that. I worry there could be issues in an emergency situation, but maybe I'm just getting too old. Well, that's a weird feeling. I've been sitting here in the car getting ready to shoot a little bit of video, and the car locked itself and now I can't get out. See, that's why I like good old door handles. One cool feature is the little light bar along the windows. It's green when the cars are unlocked and it turns red when you lock the car.
The light bar also works as a rear traffic warning. If you open the door with traffic coming from behind, the bar will flash red. That's a great use of technology.
When you first start up the car, you have to push a little start button here and you're greeted by a futuristic sound, which is cool. Below the start button is this little rocker switch, which you can use to put the car in reverse or drive, but not in park. If you want to put it in a park, there's a separate button for that, which looks like a parking brake button, but it actually puts the car in park. So does opening the door. So lots of buttons. And what I don't understand is, why is there a start button to begin with? Why is that needed? In your Tesla, you just sit down the car, it recognizes you, and you can put it straight into drive. I do not understand why there is a separate button here. That seems like another carryover from the most recent generations of BMWs as well. What is really cool, however, is this sort of hexagon-shaped new steering wheel they put in this car. I really like it. It surprisingly seems to fit your hands no matter which position you want to put them in, and whenever you turn the car, there's a surface that just feels right. This is great. Maybe Elon could learn a little bit from this steering wheel. There is also semi-autonomous driving in this car, and it works pretty darn well. It will follow a car in front of you, adjust speed, stay in its lane, and it will even change lanes for you. You simply push down the blinker stalk for 3 or 4 blinks, and the car automatically knows that you're trying to change lanes, and it does it for you. What's also cool is that, unlike many of these other systems in other cars, the steering wheel here is not pressure sensitive, it's touch sensitive. So you can actually drive the car with just your fingers resting on it or relaxing, whatever you want. That's actually very useful. The iX also comes with a heads-up display, and it is much improved from previous versions, and it wasn't bad to begin with. There's a wealth of useful information in there, really cool, but you still can't use the heads-up display with polarized sunglasses. That was the case 10 years ago. Why hasn't this issue been solved? I just don't understand. You have to choose if you want to see your heads-up display or wear your sunglasses. That's not great. The system is also much more sophisticated than you would think at first. Whenever you go down a road and the speed limit changes, it will offer you a suggestion to change your speed to the speed of the new limit, which is pretty cool. It will also come to a complete stop in stop-and-go traffic. You can even use it driving through a city, which is amazing as well. And also cool is that if you have navigation set, when you get to a road where you have to turn, the car will automatically slow down for you to remind you that you need to turn. It won't actually turn for you, but it will slow down. Very cool. Car also has red light and stop light detection, and that sort of works. I think where different countries put their stop signs and their traffic lights varies. Because of that, in Denmark, if you're coasting up to a red light, the alarm tends to go off even though you're just about to stop where you're supposed to stop. There is, of course, also BMW's Hey BMW system, which I haven't been able to use at all. One time I tried to use it, and there it is. One time I tried to use it, it led to a system crash, and I got 2 black screens for a couple of minutes, which was not great. It also seems like you have to be connected with your My BMW account to use it. Not great if you're driving a car that's not yours either. Now, being an electric car, the iX also has brake regen mode. So in theory, you can drive the car with just one pedal. In reality, it doesn't quite work like that. Even if in strongest setting, it just isn't strong enough to put the car too close to a complete stop. And what's also a little odd is if you are stopped at a light on an incline, after being stopped there for a while, if you release the brake, the car will start rolling backwards. That's just odd. When you come up a freeway with the autonomous driving on, you got to make sure you put your foot on the brake because it'll try to accelerate up to the preset limit, and that can get you into trouble quite quickly. The iX, of course, also has a parking assistant, and it actually works pretty well, but you got to watch over it because it sometimes can go a little crazy. It also parks much faster than in the past, and that can be a little nerve-wracking at times. Also, if you're parking in a city, it doesn't park very close to the curb, and the parking attendants tend to not like that, so not always great. But what is great is the BMW reversing assistant. If you happen to live in a place that has a very long and narrow and winding driveway where you can't turn around your car before you have to exit, when you get back into your car after having parked, you simply push the reversing assistant button and the car remembers exactly how you drove up to the parking spot, and it'll reverse out in the exact same way. That's super cool. It also has a function that will help you move out of a parking spot, which I'm not really sure is needed. That seems fairly simple to do, but all right, it's there. That's good. So overall, I would say that the tech in this car and the futuristicness of this car is fantastic. I love it. But the other part that you definitely want to know, of course, is how does it drive? And I will say a little bit like a tank, but in a good way. The car's heavy, but also very much on rails. It hugs the corners nicely. There's good feel in the steering wheel. I really have no complaints about the driving, except for one thing. If you're going at low speeds on a slightly uneven surface, the rear of the car goes crazy. It starts vibrating, bouncing around like it had a stiff axle in the back, and the whole car starts to shake and you get rattles from the window. That's not acceptable in a car at this level. And now I don't know if it's just this particular car that has something wrong with it, or if this happens to be that one difference that I referred to earlier between the 4.0 model and the higher level trims. You see, the 4.0 does not get an air suspension standard, and that might be what's making all the difference in the world. This iX does also ride on 22-inch rims, but they have tons of rubber on top of them. My Tesla P85 also rides on 22-inch rims with this much rubber on it, and it rides way better over surfaces like that than the iX. Now, that suspension issue in itself would be enough for me to not want to buy this car. It's that annoying when you're driving at slower speeds. Now, as we mentioned, BMW has been making cars for a very long time, but this is their first electric vehicle. And we asked the question in the beginning, did they build a true electric vehicle, or is this just another car that happens to be electric? And I can say that it's a resounding yes. They did built an actual electric vehicle. Everything about this car is new and cool, futuristic. The tech is fantastic. And if you don't have to rely on Tesla's supercharger network to charge your car or have other ways of charging your car, then this car is a fantastic contender, may even be a better car than the current Teslas. With that in mind, I can't wait to drive one of these in the 5.0 or 6.0 trim to try out the air suspension to see if that fixes the issue that I'm having, because if it does, I'm getting one of these. Now, if you found this video interesting, I have another one coming up for you right here that I think you're really gonna like. Thank you for watching, have a great day, and remember, kindness makes the world better. See you on the next one. Goodbye.